Hello, everybody, and welcome into Commodity Culture, where we break down commodities markets, sound money principles, and geopolitics, all with the goal of making you a better investor in the commodities sector. My name is Jesse Day. Today is January 5th, 2026, and I'm thrilled to welcome Melody Wright to the program, an analyst in real estate, macro, and technology, and the publisher of the M3 Melody Substack. Melody believes both the broad economy and housing market in the U.S. are in dire straits, and she brings the facts and figures to back up her claims, along with where she's seeing potential opportunity amongst the rubble. Melody also explains why the recent fraud allegations in Minnesota are just the tip of the iceberg, and rampant grifting is the rule, not the exception, when it comes to both sides of the political aisle all over the country. If you love silver, pick up your Stack Silver, Not Fiat t-shirt, exclusively available in the Commodity Culture shop using the link in the description below. And now strap yourselves in for my conversation with Melody Wright. Melody Wright, it is great to have you on Commodity Culture. I want to kick things off with a 60,000 foot overview of the US economy as we begin 2026. So from your point of view, what are the main challenges you see ahead this year, and what, if anything, is going in the right direction?
Yeah, so I think the economy is a lot worse than what most people think. And I think we've heard a lot over the last year about the K-shaped economy. But I think you're starting to see a pullback at the top of that K as well. That's definitely the case in housing. Jesse, there was a really funny article over the break from the Wall Street Journal that lists all these luxury mansions that they had talked. You were supposed to vote for your favorite house or whatever. But in each of these mansions, you could see part of the housing story, which is, somebody died or it was just too expensive to maintain. Now, of course, they didn't say it exactly that way, but there was a lot of downsizing that needed to happen in this article. And my point about this is that we've seen the top of the K, be responsible for about 50% of consumption over the last year. And I think we're starting to see them get hit as well. But, we also had a fall full of layoffs that, worst October since 2008, essentially, except for like COVID. And so, I think that the economy is much worse than many understand. Now, if we didn't have this AI, I can't call it a boom. I can call it a mania. Then, we'd be pretty much dead in the water. Now, a lot of people are pointing to what's going to come out of the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill, and that we should start to see some of that generate activity, here in the spring. We're going to have, and I'm putting all this in quotation marks, the largest tax refund season that we've ever had. The problem is you have a whole bunch of other things happening too. You have cuts to Medicaid. You have these subsidies for the American Affordable Care Act that are going away, as well as they're going to start, garnishing wages for student loans and taking those tax refunds. And so, I think where we are is it's just not great. And that once you kind of I think probably by the spring, people are going to realize that, and really, post sort of April when tax season is over, that the consumer is still dead. And it doesn't matter if they're going to get an extra $1,000 or even if that stimulus comes to fruition, an extra $2,000, that, rising healthcare costs, property insurance, taxes, car insurance, rent, even though that's starting to come down, home prices, that is just, it's really going to sort of choke any, additional consumption. So I think that the economy is in way worse shape than most will acknowledge, put it that way.
And is there any silver lining at all in these clouds, or anything that you can see at least starting to move in the right direction?
Well, I think as we start to see rent come down, as we start to see shelter come down, and I think we're going to start to see prices come down, because the cure for high prices is high prices. And I think that we've gotten to the place where, people just can't afford this anymore. And of course, here in the United States, you and I were just talking about Christmas before we started. this is a big holiday for us. I do it. Everybody overspends, even if they shouldn't, even if they know better. This is just like you get into that. You tell yourself, hey, all fall, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. You get to December, you see your kid's face and you're like, I have to do it. This is what we saw. We saw a lot of spending, buy now, pay later spending, things like that. And so, in terms of like silver lining, I think that if as these prices start to come down and you're not in debt, you will be able to take advantage of certain opportunities. You can also take advantage of, if you rent, for instance, here in the United States, you can go in and say, you know what? My lease is coming up, but I'm not paying that. And you need to give me, I'll pay $200 less a month. And they'll say, well, maybe go pound sand, but you can go down the street at that new multifamily complex is giving away 3 months free for rent. And so I think the silver lining is that for those that have been biding their time, paying down their debt, they're going to have opportunities here this year to kind of take advantage of what I'll call some deflation, in terms of some of these shelter costs, et cetera. And, I think for young Americans who also make the decision to perhaps pursue a trade versus going to college without getting into debt, that, again, they could be setting themselves up for some really good opportunities that we'll see, starting to really. So what I'm seeing is delinquency is rising. And so by Q3 of 2026, I think that there is going to be more opportunity out there. It won't be in any way the bottom, but I think that people can start taking advantage of this environment where prices are going down.
Well, one item that's been in the news concerning the U.S. has been this supposed fraud amongst Somali daycare centers in Minnesota. You released an article on January 1st on your Substack titled Grifter Nation. You wrote, while mainstream media plays partisan politics with the story and focuses on a specific group, I encourage you not to lose sight of this story's importance because it's not just in Minnesota. I've seen evidence of this fraud in my research and travels all over the country in both blue and red states. So talk to us about why Minnesota is just the tip of the iceberg here, and just how endemic is fraud and grifting when it comes to public-private partnerships in the United States right now.
Yeah, so I think it started at the end of the GFC, Jesse, and, with kind of, like, for instance, at my company, BlackRock was brought in at the behest of kind of the government once we had TARP to help us with our asset sales, dispositions, and things. So what the government kind of did is move toward this model of public-private partnership. Think about the prison system, for instance. That was run federally. Now you have a bunch of private corporations that run that. And so what happened in that is, you're probably too young to remember, but Clinton and Gore going on David Letterman and talking about the $100 hammer or whatever, like all of this government bloat, and they got rid of it. Well, what they did is they turned to these public-private partnerships, and then the bloat just came there. And so, for instance, the $20 bottle of water that you're giving a soldier overseas in the military, or suddenly the milk that you give to prisoners is $15. They're just, this grift becomes systemic and endemic. And so this is everywhere. And it really went on steroids when the American Rescue Plan came out, and they sent over $300 billion to states, counties, municipalities, and they created these programs around affordable housing, around daycare. And often, these were well-intended programs, but it happened all over the country. And so, this is one of the reasons why I think the economy is, like your very first question, why it's way worse than most are seeing, is that one of the only categories where we have seen job growth over the last year was in this education and health services category. And this is where all these jobs roll up. And so if many of these jobs are actually fraudulent, then I think we're in a place in the economy that is way worse than most understand. And so, which is being hidden by this AI mania, but it's everywhere, Jesse. I give an example in that Substack of here in Tennessee. Core Civic is who runs a prison here. and it's the same thing. And so they're getting rich. The prisoners aren't getting actually the provisions that they're supposed to get by law. And meanwhile, these people at the top of the grift are the only ones that are getting rich. And so it's not just about Minnesota. I spent 7 years in Minnesota, very familiar with that grift, but it's everywhere, and I've seen it everywhere.
The sponsor of today's episode is ARC Silver Gold Osmium. Owner Ian Everard is praised even by his competitors as one of the most honest and level-headed bullion dealers in the United States. They have some great prices. You can see some of them displayed right now on screen. Take advantage of these specials today by reaching out to Ian at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com. Make sure to tell him, of course, that Commodity Culture sent you. And now, back to the interview. So do you think that this story kind of breaking and being top of the news cycle, and it's turned into kind of a Republican versus Democrat issue, do you think this is kind of a way for, the Trump administration and the Republican side to wrap this all up with a bow and say, well, we got Waltz to not run. We're going to probably, arrest or charge some people, and then case closed, we did it. And then that way the public will kind of be distracted from the fact that both sides are committing this sort of fraud all over the country. Is that how you think this is playing out?
Well, so I think that this is, you have to ask yourself, they could have taken Waltz down with this during the presidential election. And this has been going on for a very long time. I saw evidence of it. I left Minnesota probably in 2011 and saw evidence like this. So why didn't they use it to take him down? I think this is kind of interesting. It's sort of paving the path for the Medicaid cuts that are going to go into effect in 2026. And so just an example here locally in East Tennessee, we have a local rural hospital that was destroyed during Helene. Well, they've decided not to rebuild that hospital because of the Medicaid cuts. Now, had we not had Helene, that hospital would have probably been closed as well, and because of those cuts. And so I think this is kind of the body armor around the Medicaid cuts and that are coming. And so when people, and you've already seen people going to their city councils saying, I'm not going to be able to get care, like people in wheelchairs and things like this. I think this is the way that you kind of get a hall pass on those Medicaid cuts. But yeah, I don't think that we're going to have some national awakening. I think that this is just yet another story to kind of distract us from the fact that we don't have jobs. We don't have the right kind of jobs to really make this economy pump again.
Well, let's talk about the current state of the U.S. housing market. You've alluded to a few things, but let's hone in on it. You recently mentioned that price cuts on listings in 85 cities you track are accelerating. What is that telling us about the overall trajectory of the housing market here in 2026? And are there any other data points that you could share with us to help paint an overall picture of where you see things headed?
Sure. So I track 85 cities around the country. You don't have to look at my work, though. Zillow came out and said that, and I think 50 to 53% of markets, you'd seen value destruction of about 9.7%. In terms of price reductions. And the problem is, why aren't we seeing that in the actual results? Because nothing's selling. I mean, we are set to have the worst housing market in existing home sales that we've seen since 1995. Some are saying 1982, depending on which series you're looking at. But it's abysmal. And so, I think, and I see it everywhere. What I would encourage people to look at, is pick a house in your neighborhood that's for sale. Watch and see what happens. There's one right down the street from me that they listed. They before they even listed it, I saw the U-Haul. It started out at like $450. And that was listed probably in October. It's down to $399, and there's still no beds. And this is a very nice home. It's actually on a local college here. It looks perfect for maybe a professor or something like that, but it's not going anywhere. And so, the problem right now is that we don't have any transactions. So we can't actually see price discovery. And the people that are transacting are, of course, the top 1%, or the ones that are being sort of what I would say lured into the market by these FHA programs or things like that. But they're running out of those people. You can see that with purchase applications. The Fed tracks rejection rates. That's over 20%. For the mortgage refinance, it's over 42% rejection rate. And so we're at a point where credit quality has degraded. And so people can't even get credit to participate in this market. And so unfortunately, the boomers, we also have this other thing, called rage delisting, where people are just pulling those homes off market because they can't get the price that they thought that the home was worth. Even though we've had recent articles in both Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal kind of saying, you need to be a little more realistic about what you think your home is going to sell for. But how can you blame them? They've been looking at their Zestimate for years now and believing that number, even though they never question, how does that number get computed? Like, how do they come up with that? And it's a very bad, it's not a good estimate of what your home is because they use comps that are 20 miles away. So, I think that we're at the point where when we do start to really have meaningful transactions, that's when we're going to get the price discovery. And with foreclosures on the rise, those meaningful transactions are going to start to accelerate. And in Q2 of 2026, once kind of everybody, the pig gets through the python of this FHA program, you are going to have meaningful foreclosures and it will start to impact price.
Well, as an investor, when it comes to both residential and commercial real estate in the US, are there any segments of the market that look bullish right now, or would you just be completely sitting on the sidelines at this point?
Yeah, you're even seeing delinquency rise in industrial. This is one of the funny thing about this data center narrative is that we should be seeing a ton of permits, right? We should be seeing a ton of activity if suddenly we're going to have this data center boom. Not sure how you get a permit on the moon yet, but I'm sure there's a way that you do that. But yeah, I just don't see that happening. And so, there's not really a sector that I would be excited about right now. Unless I was, what I would be doing right now is building a fund to be able to buy distressed properties. That's what I would be doing. And you are seeing transactions increase in the office space as people think things are bottoming. But I would just tell people, I wrote a piece last week for Unicus Research called Green Shoots, ? Because the industry always sees the green shoots. And I said, I took Dallas, for example, which right now they have the second highest office vacancy in the country. And they're building a 38-story office tower downtown where nobody wants to be. So that vacancy is just going to increase. And what I said is the only green shoots are the ones you're seeing, in the cracks in the parking lot of the abandoned buildings, because that's what it is. So I don't think there's any sector right now that, now senior housing is going to be something that people need to look at, but I think it's going to look very different from what people think of today. Like I don't think it's going to be nursing homes. And you can see that in the data right now. A lot of the securitizations that have assisted living facilities in them are seeing very high delinquency because people are choosing to age in place instead.
Let's talk about an article that was recently released in the Financial Times called Private Credit Firms Pile into Consumer Debt as Risk-Taking Mounts. In it, analyst Adam Josephson stated, in 2025, private credit groups, including the likes of KKR, Blue Owl, and Sixth Street, either purchased or struck so-called forward flow agreements to purchase $136 billion of consumer loans. That number compared with just $10 billion in the previous year. What is going on in your view with this massive increase in consumer loan purchases? And what do you think the end game of these private credit groups are?
Yeah, so you have to kind of look at history and, after the GFC, you had the Basel III endgame and you basically, the banks had to pull back because they had capital ratios, things, certain assets were risk weighted a different way than others. And so they kind of pulled back on lending to Main Street. And you can look at any bank's balance sheet and kind of see that on the consumer side. Where they didn't pull back was to these other. They were lending to other institutions, and this is the only place you're actually seeing increase in lending by the banks. And what these other institutions did is they they're the smartest guys in the room, Jesse. Like they thought they understood lending and credit, and they use those inflated credit scores that we saw to and algorithms, and I laugh because you can always game those underwriting systems to kind of qualify borrowers. And so you had a whole bunch of people in this space that really don't understand credit, and they're about to get really crucified, but because everybody always thinks they're smarter than everybody else. It's like, I remember at a conference in probably 2022, a guy who was doing algorithm driven home equity lending was like, I can't get anybody to talk to me. I said, well, dude, you got to understand, like all of us that went through the GFC look at home equity loans and we cringe. I mean, I remember at my former company when we sold them for 10 cents on the dollar, and then those things followed me around for years. But guess what happens? Everybody forgets, or everybody believes the narrative that, oh, there's so much equity out there. To a year, probably not even a year, 18 months later, that guy's doing, going gangbusters with his company, doing these home equity loans. A lot of times they're not even being properly reported to credit. And so we don't actually understand the true picture of home equity out there at all. But yeah, these companies have gotten big and they're going to be hurt bigly. And, and this is probably why we're seeing so much stress in the repo markets as well.
Well, I have to get your take on precious metals as well. I know it's not an area you cover a lot, but I'm just wondering, with both metals hitting new all-time highs recently in 2025, and from your perspective as a macro analyst, what do you make of this price action? And is the rapid rise of gold and silver telling us something about the underlying economy?
Yeah, so I don't, I may not necessarily talk about it very often, but it's, I believe in gold and silver. And when people actually ask my advice, which they should not, about what to invest in, that's what I tell them. And I've been telling them for years, I bought all my family little silver coins for Christmas in 2022, which I tell them now, look at what it is now, comparatively speaking. I don't trust any of this price action right now, Jesse, because I think it's probably the horse is way out of the barn and it's running and galloping and nobody really knows what it's about to get into, if you know what I mean. But, with silver, I think it's just so useful. And I think we'll probably talk about it, but what we're seeing is that the minerals we need, the rare earth minerals that we need for, people can say AI, but it's really for weapons because I do believe we're kind of gearing up for war, unfortunately. We need these metals. And so I think that is a big part of the story. I also think, people just don't trust they don't trust the stock market. They don't trust what they're seeing. And so they're kind of going to those hard assets. There was an article yesterday, I think, about China specifically and how high net worth individuals are really making a transition from real estate because it's an albatross. Like when you have rising property taxes, rising insurance, and you don't have home price appreciation, that thing becomes a losing asset very quickly. And so people are making the transition from real estate into metals because, and I think there's probably some people that think that with the BBB, inflation is going to run out of control. I think that what I've learned, diving into macro is that there is no one reason and everybody wants it to be one reason. But in reality, if people are really sure about something, you need to start asking questions because this world is very complicated and there's a lot of players. And so I don't know exactly what to make of it, Jesse, but I'm very cautious right now because I think there's a lot of shenanigans going on. And I think about I think it was silver with JP Morgan several years ago, thinking its vault was full of silver, had that on their balance sheet. They opened the doors and realized those bags were full of, dirt and somebody had stolen it. I kind of feel like we might suddenly see a lot more of that where there's been a lot of rehypothecation. And so things could come. I mean, there could be a lot of the markets could become very disorderly. And so I'm a conservative. When I see something like that, I tend to kind of pull back until I actually know what's going on.
Well, you spoke about potential war and tensions rising around the world. I want to get your take on the military operation that took place in Venezuela and the arrest of President Nicolas Maduro. How do you see the situation playing out from here? How could you see it potentially impacting the economy, if at all? And is Greenland next? Because at this point, why not?
I think Tracy Schuchart, or Chi Girl, is how she's known on X Twitter, probably came out with the best article about this, and just really pointed to it's not about oil. It's actually about the rare earths, and it's also about China, Iran, and Russia having infrastructure or vested interest in the region that we needed to kind of put a kibosh on. And so, I think the big narrative is oil, which, when you really look into that, it's like, do we really need, that's not our biggest concern. And so, Greenland will probably be next. And what is really annoying to me about this is that nobody's being honest with the American public about what's really going on. I mean, we're talking about drugs. I mean, if we wanted to stop the drugs, Jesse, all we'd have to do is stop the money. I mean, we don't have to go in with guns ablazing and bombs, like just shut down the money and that would shut it down. So this isn't about drugs. It's about those rare earth minerals more than likely. And, oil is a bonus and things like that. But what does it mean? It just the biggest thing that it means to me is that we are not being told the truth about what's going on. Therefore, we have to be very mistrusting of those narratives. What it means for the economy, I don't know. I think that the forces that I just talked about, the Medicaid cuts, the student loans, suddenly there are going to be a whole bunch of people that are going to have to, in that SAVE plan, that will probably have to start paying again. If they do take those tax refunds. I just think there's so many things coming for consumers that whatever, oil investment or things that could happen, they might actually, benefit a few, but it's not going to benefit the economy full stop, in my opinion.
Yeah, and it's amazing that today in 2025, we have people on social media I've seen who still believe the American democracy reigns supreme. We take out an evil dictator. I mean, in all of these operations, of which there's been many post-World War II, I believe over 100, almost never, or perhaps never, does this actually benefit the people of the country where this takes place. There's so many examples, but it's just interesting. Although I've heard that a lot of the the content online that's pro this move is AI generator of bots. Who knows anymore with 100%. What's going on online?
Yeah. My favorite, Jesse, now it's like a little game with me, is I figure out what kind of bot it is that's responding to me, because it's wild. Like the housing bots are also the anti-Israel bots. Like it's really bizarre. And so it's kind of like, it's now that I understand the game, and it took me a couple years to understand the game. You can really start having fun with it and just kind of, there's a lot of clues out there if you're paying attention of what's really going on. And I think you can watch these things. They always have this pre-narrative that comes out. 50-year mortgage is a good example. There was some random poster on X that started talking about paying off his mortgage, and everybody's like, you're stupid. Why did you do that? 3 days later, 50-year mortgage. I mean, you can just watch these things unfold, but I would encourage anybody that thinks that whatever you're reading online is true. No, they're telling you something for a reason. Try to figure out why, and you'll be better off, in my opinion.
Yes. I mean, we could talk about that topic alone for for a very long time. But I do want to shift to getting your take on the broad market at present. The indices also hitting all-time highs in 2025, continuing to grind higher despite calls from many analysts that things are massively overvalued and there's no way this can continue. In your opinion, is the broad market in a bubble right now? And do you think 2026 could be the year that it finally bursts?
It's definitely in a bubble. And, AI is not what people think. And you can believe in the technology without believing in the hype. And you can understand its limitations. And so it's definitely a bubble. But I could see us bubbling along for, a little bit longer. Now, March is always, that quarter just, there's a lot of movement, a lot of liquidity moving around, things like that. That's when we saw the SVB bank failure. I always get Lehman and Bear Stearns mixed up, but that's when we saw one of them in March. And so, March could be when we start to really, where we might start to see some trouble. But this is all hopium, and this is all BS that we're skating along on now. And it's not going to matter till it matters. And I think that it's going to really start to matter in Q2 of 2026 when those foreclosures start to rise. Because when you have foreclosures, people can't really argue anymore that the economy is doing great. And, we'll probably get another random DeepSeek type event, right? We'll probably get some kind of, oh my gosh, we just jumped way ahead with a way to kind of configure the chips or that gives us XYZ capacity. But back to my point about why I don't see permits for these new data centers. So, I think everybody is just pushing, allowing your institutionals to exit. And unfortunately, retail will probably be left holding the bag as per usual.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had our mutual friend Jack Gamble on the show recently to discuss the AI bubble, and he was basically saying all the hype behind it is essentially fraud and grifting, going back to what we were talking about at the top of the show. We've seen some very strange behavior from OpenAI CEO Sam Altman as well as Palantir CEO Alex Karp on camera. Very, very bizarre situation. Sam Altman basically berating somebody for asking him, hey, if you have this much CapEx planned, like, how does that even make sense? How are you going to make that money back? And what's the business model here? And Sam Altman said, you know what? You can sell your shares because I have buyers lined up for them. And then he said, enough, as if it was like he was being harassed or accused of something falsely. It was so weird. And then we all know about Karp bouncing around, probably coked up or something like that. At least he looks that way, putting out these veiled short sellers are attacking us. And it's insane. It leads me to believe that they have something to hide. What are your thoughts here on this kind of off the wall behavior from these CEOs in the industry? And does that kind of send off alarm bells in your mind?
Yeah. So did they close that funding round? I think they were supposed to close it by the end of the year with SoftBank, and they weren't close on OpenAI. I haven't seen anything today, but yeah, no. I have a friend, Michael Ferris, who does Coffee and a Mic, and, he talks about this as like the superhero movie, and it very much is. And I see Karp and Altman as like these anti-heroes, right? They're crazy. They're absolutely crazy. I mean, Altman can't even finish his sentence. I mean, he doesn't even look real, with Karp going around doing his handstand push-ups, like you say, all coked out. I mean, I just think they're crazy. And yeah, they're hiding something. And they're acting. This is all performance. And again, to just keep things going a little bit longer. And it's this cult, this technology cult that they have, where people really believe like that we're going to beat death or something, and they've got so many people in this mindset that, they can do these crazy things and people think that's great. I mean, you look at Musk. I mean, what promise has he ever delivered? And yet, legions of people follow this man around. And so these, to me, they're all actors. And I think between Altman and Wang, one of them's going to be in jail by the end of the year.
Very
honestly.
Interesting. Well, Melody, this has been a fantastic conversation. Tell us about the M3 Melody Substack and anywhere else you want to direct people online.
Sure. So I write, frequently in the M3 Melody Substack just about what's going on in the economy, contextualized for housing specifically. But, a lot of people think I just need a good school in my neighborhood and that's where I'm going to buy a house. But in reality, it's way more complicated than that. So you can find that at M3 Melody Substack. And so I kind of take these news stories that we talk about and I kind of relate them to housing and that. So, and encourage anybody, just even the free version has a ton of data and information. And then on X Twitter, I'm M3_Melody. And then infrequently I post on my YouTube channel, M3 Melody YouTube.
Great. I'll put links to all of that in the description below. Thank you so much, Melody, for coming on the show. It's been a blast.
Thank you for having me. It's always my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. Our sponsor is ARC, silver, gold, osmium. They have some excellent prices right now on silver bullion products. They are appearing on your screen. These are all while supplies last and subject to change. So reach out to owner Ian Everard today at 307-264-9441 or by email at ian@arcsgo.com and make sure to tell him that Commodity Culture sent you. And of course, pick up your Stack Silver, Not Fiat t-shirt, backed by a 100% quality guarantee using the link in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Commodity Culture is a series on commodities and natural resources. If you would like to see more, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you're always up to date with the latest episodes.